I'm terrified of live coding. I cannot believe he did that, but it's always impressive. I will not be doing live coding. I'm not that guy. I'm Scott Berinato. I'm with the Harvard Business Review. This is going to be sort of the polar opposite of what you just saw, but you actually might see some common themes. I just want to get a sense from the crowd. How many journalists out here? Any journalists at all? A couple? One or two? My people? Data scientists? Woo! Data scientists who think they're good at visualization. Managers who manage data scientists that wish they were better at visualization. Any couple? Yeah, okay. I'm going to talk about that a lot today, okay? So let me see how this thing works. Yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about that today. I actually communicate with managers all the time. I wrote a book about this topic for managers. A lot of what you see will be geared toward managers, but I think it applies to journalists and data scientists as well. And believe it or not, when I talk to managers, I sometimes have to convince them of this, that good viz works, right? Sometimes people are like, no, especially the financial guys, it's unbelievable. They just don't want to do it. They want their tables. And to prove it, I say, look, trust, I did the neuroscience, it works. But if my hotel room was on fire and I had to get out, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to run to the back of the door and I'm going to see this and I'm not going to escape the fire, right? Because the way our brain processes text like this is different than the way it processes a picture like this. And we process this in a lot more efficiently, a lot better. We can recall it and use it much better, right? And that's sort of an absurd example just to get their mind in it. But I see this all of the time too, right? This was from Vox just about a month ago, and I grabbed it because I thought, I'm reading statistics, and this is the dumbest thing I've ever done, right? Because statistics in sentence form are really hard to parse, especially when you have very specific numbers and a lot of numbers, right? And I was thinking, why didn't Vox just do this? Because if I had seen this, I get to the point a lot more quickly, and then I spend my time thinking about what it means, not about what am I reading and trying to hold variables in my head and think about that. So I think we all agree good viz works. We don't have to get into this too much, but believe me, I think it's important to know there are people out there who just aren't quite sure of that. You're right. Yep. I make this point to audiences all the time that the companies and the organizations, the journalist organizations that invest in visualization are going to do better than the ones that don't. And I use Daryl Morey here. I've talked to quite a bit. He's an old friend of mine. Because in basketball, if you think about it, there's a very clear competitive set there. And he's basically saying, if we do this better than the other guys, we will win more games. And I think that's the way it is in business in general. But as I've been giving this presentation, talking to a lot of executives, that's one of the benefits of being at HBR. I get to talk to CEOs and others all the time. I started to notice something else he said in this that I think is important, but I never really thought about a lot. And that's, it's easy to do poorly, and they use it wrong. And that's what I'm hearing from executives. And I'm sort of interested in exploring that, and we started talking about it, and I started asking, why is that? And what I've come to believe and come to sort of think about and talk to these guys about is that they have decided that data science is really important, and then they're like, I'm going to go get the guy who can do all of that for me. I'm sorry I gendered it. The person who can do all of that to me, right? They're looking for unicorns. They're actually trying to hire unicorns. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today, right? To get to this point, I want to sort of jump the rails here and get away from visualization entirely, because I think it's really important for our minds to be moving around and thinking and not just getting locked in on seeing a bunch of pictures. Anybody know what this is? Probably not. It's hard to see. This is from a patent application for the first synthesizer ever built around 1900. I'm not sure of the exact date. It's called the Telharmonium. It ran on 12 steam engines. There were 2 people in the world who knew how it worked, and if it broke, those were the only 2 people who could fix it. They only ever built 2 of them. It was massively expensive, okay? That was the first synthesizer ever built. This is also a synthesizer from a little later. This is probably the least cool band in history or something. This is the RCA Mark II, I believe. Very expensive, very complex. A dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen people knew how it worked or could fix it and use it. A couple of avant-garde musicians played with it. Still not really accessible, right? Anybody recognize that device? Theremin, right? A little more accessible, a little less expensive. A few more people could use it. Still really weird to use, and you gotta move your hands like this. Different kind of synthesizer, opening up to the masses a little bit, right? But then came this guy, right? The Mini Moog, awesome, right? This was what we call the democratizing moment for synthesizers. Became cheap enough to use, cheap enough to acquire, easy enough to use that everybody started doing it, right? And when that happens, it sets off this chain where a company or people innovate, people adopt it, they ask for new things, there's more innovation, which leads to more adoption, which leads to more innovation, which leads to more adoption, which leads to a flock of seagulls, right? This was sort of the height of synth pop. When this thing became so cheap and so easy, everybody was doing it. And you got this crazy amount of innovation and thinking and creativity, some good, some not so good, around music and synthesizers. Even today, it continues. You actually don't even need a keyboard anymore. There's GarageBand, which is on every Mac on the planet, I think. So when you think about it now, creating music sort of through a synthesis is really democratized as much as it possibly could be, okay? This happens in lots of technologies. HTML's democratizing moment was easy to recognize. It was those ugly GeoCities websites, right? Remember those? I'm a little bit older than most of the faces I'm looking at, but in the 80s, word processing came out, and all of a sudden there were thousands of newsletters, homespun newsletters with 80 fonts on them and clip art all over the place. There's this sort of ugly moment in democratization, which is sort of fun to look back on. And even content management, a business I think about a lot, for a long time was these deep, complex, homegrown systems like Method, and even WordPress today is getting easier and easier, but these were big, complex systems. And now if I want to be a publisher, I basically can go to Medium and do it right away, right? So more democratization. And with data visualization as well. We're going to follow the same path really quickly we did with synthesizers. 100 years ago, this was a data operation. This is at an electric light company, utility. They had a bunch of people in a room doing punch cards. Those punch cards were sorted, put in drawers. When it was time to visualize, they would take those drawers out, bring them over to the subject matter expert, who would spread them out on a table with the draftsman and say, this is the story we're going to tell. And they started making incredible, incredible visualizations. I won't go into much detail. All of these are hand done. A Dataviz guy I know recently tried to recreate a couple of these and could not do it because it takes so much skill that it's just lost the time, right? And all of these pictures come from a book called Graphic Methods for Presenting Facts by a man named Willard Brinton. Highly recommend it. It's 105 years old now, but it will show you that everything we think is new in visualization is not. We've been doing this for a long time. But these big companies were doing this, and there were only a few who could. The railroads, because they were giant monopolies, right, and had all of the talent and money in the world. The utilities and others. It wasn't that accessible. By the 50s, it was a little more accessible, especially in the government. And a woman named Mary Eleanor Spear, who's an amazing visualizer, worked in lots of government departments and actually was President Kennedy's chart maker, wrote a couple of books about it and was showing how the government had sort of adopted visualization as a communication tool pretty widely, but still not, completely open to the masses. This is the economic analyzer. I have no idea how it works, but there's lots of levers and buttons and wires and things. But they were doing things like this at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They had a chart room there so that they could communicate with executives about the data they were collecting. Opened up a little more, right? Now we're sort of at the RCA Mark II or the Theremin kind of thing, but still not quite there. And then there was the mini Moog of Dataviz, Chart Wizard. Everybody recognize that, right? Beautiful. Love it. Suddenly, anybody could make a chart. And they could actually put it in a glass box and make it 3D too, right? It was like they could do whatever they wanted, and they did. It was crazy. And that was great. I think democratization is great. It's important. Anybody can use it, and that's really important. It's cheap enough to acquire, easy enough to use, right? But that's also the bad part, right? Because then you end up with GeoCities. You end up with all these problems. You end up with lots of noise among the signals. And you end up with the famous tilt it, make it 3D, show it to the boss, and he will be impressed chart, right? And then they tried to get better, but it didn't really much get better. I'll get back to this one in a little bit, but that was Chart Wizard. Today, we're at the GarageBand of visualization, right? This is part of my Plotly library. I've got all kinds of things in there. I don't think there's anything proprietary in there, but now we can do this, and we can do it in real time. We can put data in and keep changing the data and just let the charts update. It's amazing, right? But that doesn't make it good necessarily. I do this all the time. I'll pull somebody else's chart and I'll say, no, I want it to look like that, and I can do that in an hour. This is democratization sort of in action. But can doesn't equal should, and easy doesn't equal good. And that's what happens with democratization. It gets so easy to do, we just say, well, let's just do it. We don't think through what we're actually trying to accomplish. I can make a tree map, but should I? I don't know. We don't actually think about these things as much as we should. So democratization, in summary, Necessary, useful, beautiful, really, really inefficient, right? And what I've heard when I started talking to executives and managers and even data scientists is, well, yeah, I agree with you, but we're in the dark blue here, right? And if we're not, we'll just get the people who fit in there, right? We'll find the unicorns who can keep us in that good part, not in the sort of overall section. And I'm actually going to argue that that's harder to do than we think, and there might be a different way to go about it. Okay, I use the word good a lot. The name of my book is Good Charts. Again, it's for managers. And I think it's important to define the word good because it's sort of easy to get wrong. We're using it in a very specific way. A lot of people I talk to think good means good UX, good design, good rules of grammar for charts. The bars are the right size, I'm using the right kind of chart, all of that. And what I find when I ask people to critique charts is if they don't know what the chart is about right away, if they're not looking at the idea in the chart, they immediately go to this. And I say, well, what do you think of this chart? And they'll say, it's too busy, or why are there so many tick marks? And they start, it's weird, they just turn into sort of pedantic grammarians, right? But I'm not saying good equals good grammar, because good grammar is important, but it's not everything. Mark Twain would tell you that, and Churchill will show you that even good grammar kind of is not always the best outcome as well, right? The other thing that happens, well, I love doing that. I love watching people's eyes. Everybody just goes right to it, right? Preconscious processing. You can't stop yourself from looking at that. A lot of people think good is it gets people's attention. It draws them. They look at it right away, and it's really pretty, right? And design can be important as well, but it's not everything either, because if you don't get to meaning quickly, people get annoyed with your charts. And there's actually research that suggests if you show them something and it catches their eye, and then they can't figure out what it means, they get annoyed at you. They rank your data as less credible. Not your chart, your actual data. They don't believe you, right? So pretty alone doesn't lead to the best outcomes either. I encourage you to read the sentence which was submitted to me as an editor at HBR. Kind of mouth the words. It's a gorgeous sentence. It's lovely, and it means nothing. It is useless. I edited this to 2 points, : right? Because that's all it meant. And the person who wrote it was really mad. They said, you're taking my voice away. And I said, well, your voice is not helping people understand anything. It's just really getting in their way. So pretty alone also doesn't make good, right? So what's good? This is the entire reason I wrote the book, and what I tell managers every time is just put your data aside for a minute and think about, what am I trying to say, who am I saying it to, and where am I saying it, right? If you do that, you will get to better visual outcomes all of the time. And for data scientists, I think this equally applies. I've talked to a lot of teams who can generate charts by the thousands, and then they bring them to the bosses, and the bosses go, eh. Or they create a dashboard, and the dashboard is used for 3 days, and then nobody looks at the dashboard anymore. I've heard that story over and over again, and it's because we don't stop and say, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are we trying to say? Okay? I'm going to use really simple examples, but I think it applies to all visualization, right? What am I trying to say with this chart, which is in rollingstone.com? Hipsters are right, vinyl is great, right? It's on the come. Look at that surge in vinyl. But keep your eye on the 2014 bar, because it's not. There's no vinyl revolution. It's not happening. I mean, it's cool, but it's not, right? Again, I just thought about, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to tell one story versus another there. This is a really common chart to generate in Plotly or wherever, the dual y-axis. But if I'm an investor and I need to know about my investments, for example, that's a different context. It's really hard to get good meaning out of this chart. I really need to know about the volatility of my investments. Are they going up or down? Am I making money or losing money? Which one is a better investment, right? So if I stop and think about, how do I get a visual that tells me that, I'll probably end up here rather than the other place. And one of my favorite activities, my favorite examples, because this actually happened to us at HBR, we changed the subject, but we generated the chart on the left, and we were ready to publish it and say, that's good, it's customer purchase activity by time of day. And somebody stopped and said, well, wait a minute though, time of day where? Because it turns out our data was formatted just to say it's time of day on the server where the purchase was recorded in New York, right? So it's just Eastern time. But we're trying to figure out customer activities, right? So we actually had to go in and manipulate the data to figure out where they were, and then translate the time, and then do the chart on the right, which actually shows purchase activity by their time of day, not my time of day, right? And that's a very simple thing that happens all of the time, where we just don't think through what we're trying to show. We just say, this is the column I need. I'm going to actually visualize that. I'll make it pretty, and we'll go forward. And we're lucky on this one, but I've seen others where somebody presents a chart in a meeting, and the bosses will say, well, but that's the time of day in the server, and the person's standing there going, yeah, I guess I didn't think of that, right? So what are we're just thinking about what we're trying to say, asking many, 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 many questions about what we're trying to accomplish with these visualizations. Not what can we show, but what should we show, how should we show it. As a presenter, I'm obsessed with these two. I think about these two a lot because I want to avoid this. And this is another thing I see all of the time, right? What is he trying to say? This was taken by a friend of mine, and I love the picture because it's very lo-fi, but she's in the audience. This is what the audience sees, right? And so he's pointing up there. I'm guaranteeing you he's not saying, here's the idea that I want you to leave here with. He's saying the x-axis is this and the y-axis is this, and if you compare these bars to the ones over there, he's talking about the structure of his data, not about the ideas in his data, right? We don't want to be this guy, and context helps us avoid this. HBR is famous for 2x2s. Everybody loves a good 2x2, right? 2x2 charts. So when we define it in the book, this is finally what we say is a good chart. You get your contextual awareness as high as you can. You spend more time on that and less time on rules and design, though you want some design skills, that's fine. And when you cross those, the top right quadrant in 2x2s is always the virtuous one, right? So that's where your good charts are. Let's get back to this real quick, because I think this is a really good example. This was presented by a real consultant to his clients. Here's the context. He's trying to help them make a decision. And he clearly clicked on Excel and pasted this into his PowerPoint, and I'm being very kind to him because he also had 7 bullet points stuffed on the page, so it was even smaller. And he said, okay, we need to make a decision. Now, you can't see this because he didn't think through his context, right? This is just what the program spit out for him. There are 4 years going into the future. Each set of bars represents 4 years going into the future, and there's 4 scenarios they can choose from. Status quo, scenario 1, 2, and 3. Revenues on the left, margins on the right. And he's standing in front of them and he says, so if you compare the status quo to scenario 3, right? Okay, go ahead. Well, okay, I see a bunch of flat bars on status quo and revenue, and they're higher in margins, which is weird. There's a sameness here. This is not a usable chart, right? He can't help them make a decision with this. And we do this all the time, especially with our live data sets and our big data sets where we generate dashboards and lots of content, but we don't think about what we're showing or how people might be using it. The really pernicious thing here is the y-axis on the right chart, it only goes to about $105 million, and the one on the left goes to $360 million. So even though those bars are taller, they represent a third of the value, right? So we went through the process we lay out in the book to sort of get your context right, talking and sketching and prototyping, and we changed it to this. Now, if you want to compare status quo to scenario 3, it's a lot easier to do, right? I can compare across, I can compare down, everything's clearly labeled. It's prettier, but the key point I really need to make here is that this is not a better chart because it's prettier. It's a prettier chart because it's better, right? We did not go to design school in between these two charts that we made, right? We just actually asked questions about this. Do we need different colors for the years? Is it important to distinguish? No, it's not. In fact, it's a trend line. He said to me, in fact, it's a trend line. I said, well, then why are you showing me bars if it's a trend line, you know? If I need them to compare scenarios, I better be able to see which scenario is which, right? So the design, the beautiful thing about spending time in your context is the design just falls out of it, right? You don't have to become a brilliant UX person, though it's good to have one on hand, which I'll get to in a second. Another one really quickly, I won't dive into this, is this comes from a dashboard of a friend of mine. This is from Tableau, obviously, but I've seen similar things in other programs where he had to update people monthly on their scores on how are we doing kind of poll. They took a poll, how are we doing, scale of 1 to 5. And this is every business unit's score, right? And he put this in the dashboard, and he was very proud. And he's like, it's cool, look at it, it's cool. And he said the executives looked at it and go, neat, and then they didn't use it, right? So we again went through the process. Well, what do you need them to do with this? And he said, I need them to know where they are compared to normal and compared to other groups, right? And I want to see their progression over time. So we went through the process again, and we dumped into Plotly, and we produced this, right? This is the same data. The actual same data. Threshold, you know, I want to see if they're, you know, cross the threshold of good with that line. The gray dots are other business units. The blue dots is your business unit, and the depth of the color represents more recent to less recent, right? So now suddenly somebody can look at this at a glance, compared to this, and know where they stand, right? Just thinking through the context. Why don't we get those second versions? Why do we get the first ones? Why do we get easy and not good? Why do we get can and not should? And this is what I hear people say. HBR, you wrote this article in 2011 about big data, and I got this McKinsey report, and I plopped down $15 million to build my data science operation. Literally 15, companies. I got a whole room full of them. I put them in the basement. It's great. They're doing great. They're doing wonderful stuff. I have no idea, though. I have no idea what we're getting out of it. I don't see the results, right? Okay. And so I want results. I want to see what we're getting out of this, right? But what they're saying to me is, I want results based on hiring the guy or the person, who's the design thinking, data wrangling, subject matter knowing unicorn, right? They want their data science teams to do everything. And I don't think that's fair, and I don't think it's right. And I think there's a better way, right? So they don't want this, they want that. They don't want this, they want that. And they definitely don't want this. Unicorns don't exist. We all know that, right? We all agree? My daughter made me put mostly. She's not convinced yet, so I left it in there just for her, because I'm a nice dad. And this is what I'm proposing, and this is what I tell them. Stop trying to make your data science team do everything, right? Get yourself a design thinker, get yourself a data person, get yourself a subject matter expert, and I'm using the singular, but it could be plural, it doesn't matter, right? Get yourself a team. It's not that complicated. But because of the democratization, because of the ease of use of these tools, because I can go in Plotly and in 15 minutes get 7 different possible outcomes, we have stopped thinking of that way. The convenience of doing lots of stuff really fast has trumped this sort of thought and depth of doing one thing really well that takes a little longer, okay? And what's interesting to me is, as I started thinking about this, I realized for 100 years, it was a team-based sport, right? Dataviz was a team thing. When they were doing this 105 years ago, there was probably 15 people that were involved in any set of charts, right? You got this whole room of data folks, you got 2 or 3 drafts people, and at least 1 subject matter expert. And they're all doing this because they realize there's value in working together to make this happen. Mary Eleanor Spear, the woman in the government I talked about, wrote 2 books about Dataviz. And they were written sort of in this tone that she was sort of frustrated with all the bad charts she had gotten over the years. And so it was sort of like, everybody just shut up and read my book and you'll be better at charts. Really sort of impatient tone, which is really it's wonderful books. In those books, she assumes you're working on a team. She doesn't even suggest it. She just says, of course, you're going to have these 3 people working on any particular project, right? You're going to have I think she called them the communicator, the graphics analyst, and the draftsman, right? So it was assumed. There was no question about it. Now we have to sort of get back to that. And at HBR, we've actually institutionalized that. So from a journalist perspective, we fell into the same trap. Everybody said, Scott, you're an editor. You kind of like the graphics thing. You can do a little D3. I'm not good. I'm terrible. But so go make some visual stories for us. And I tried, and I failed miserably. Terrible, because I'm not a unicorn. And so we said, we're going to do this as a team approach, right? So we do something like this. This is detail from a narrative story we told about how boards of directors at the largest companies in the world are interconnected, how those companies share board members. So you're looking at the global oligarchy here in 1976, right? These are 176 companies. The gray lines show regional board connections, so like Europe or North America, and the red lines show international ones. And we did this over 40 years. And you can actually see what's happened to the global oligarchy over 40 years. Beautiful story, but it was a team of 3 plus, say, 3, right? The core team was 3. We had me, and I was freed up to just be the subject matter expert. I didn't have to worry about D3 because I had Tyler, who helped me with that, and I didn't have to worry about UX, frankly, because I had Marta help me with that. And we collaborated, and we sat together, and we worked hard to make that happen. At Boeing, for example, this is sort of a classic example of this now, but they've institutionalized data science teamwork, where they actually call it paired analysis, and they sit the tools person and the data scientist together with the subject matter expert, and they go back and forth. So when they wanted to figure out how to sort of suss out why planes were hitting birds on takeoff and landing, they sat down together and worked together, and they said, okay, the subject matter expert said, at first I need to see how many strikes happen where and what kinds of birds. spit something out, go back, they go back and forth. Now show me sort of time of day, month of year. Show me like where and when the bird strikes are happening. Okay, let's cross-reference those two things. Now I can see bird strikes by time of day and location, and they go back and forth to create the insights they need to communicate to their bosses. And when it comes time to communicate to the bosses, you of course give them something as simple and dopey as this, because executives really don't want to spend any time thinking at all. And you say 31% of bird strikes hit the wing, and they go, oh, that's pretty. Sorry, I like to tease executives. But it's institutionalized there, right? And I've seen other places. Accenture is another place where they've institutionalized this teamwork, and it's really important. And I think data scientists who are already used to working in an agile approach can actually take advantage of that. These teams should sit together. They should be agile, pilot navigator approach, right? Bring in designers as you need. Learn about each other. At Accenture, all of the data scientists have had to take design classes, UX classes. And all of the designers and UX people are now taking Statistics 101, right? You don't have to become an expert, but you want to actually know a little bit about the others, have empathy, understand their jobs, understand what they're doing, and work together as a team, because teams are good. I did that. I didn't think I could do it in 30 minutes, but I think I did. This is sort of the outline of the book, good charts. I'll be signing it later. It's here somewhere. I'm not sure where. Really, for people who just want a basic understanding of how to get from that sort of automated output to something a little better when it comes time to communicate to the lay audience. That was our goal for the book. And I thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
In this team approach, it seems that the end user, the executive in that case, has to be a key component. So how do you get from them what they'll really use or what they really want? Because I think that's the step where it's hard for them to even communicate what it is that they would use.
Yeah, it's incumbent upon the subject matter expert to know that audience and know it well. But I do get this question a lot. In fact, I did this presentation once, and somebody raised their hand and said, where do you put the takeaway on all your charts? I like your charts, but where do you put the takeaway? And I said, what's the takeaway? And he said, it's the 5-sentence description of what the chart says that goes with every chart we produce, because the executives want that, you know? There's a lot of HBR articles about soft management and leading up and soft leadership. I do a lot of leading by example, just showing them what I think they need, not what they ask for, until they get angry or upset about it. But it is a huge challenge, and I hear that over and over again. My boss likes 3D pie charts. Like, I have to show him 3D pie charts. It's absurd, right? But if you can show them something better and get them using that, that helps a lot. So.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So your talk was mainly for managers or like people in a setting where teams are possible. Like, what if you're a PhD student or in like a very like autonomous sort of position? How do you replicate what you've sort of advised?
So who's your audience as a PhD student for your visualizations?
I don't know, your PI, the academic community.
So different situations, different audience?
Sure.
Right, so whatever project you're undertaking, that's the first question is who am I actually talking to, right? And what do they need to know? Not what is the chart I can build that everybody will get, because it's going to be different for different audiences. In a data science situation or a PhD situation, if you're communicating with other PhDs, you can do the ugly, fast, quick, because you both know that language. You can both talk about it. When it comes time to defend your dissertation, it's going to be a different chart. Now, people always say, but that's more work, Scott. That's terrible. I don't want to do any more work. And I always say, when I started this book tour and started doing this, I invested in new clothes, I got a haircut, I took speaking lessons, I spent hundreds or thousands of dollars getting better at getting my message across, and it would be a crime for me not to take the charts that I'm, convey the ideas I want people to feel and be moved by and not put that time and effort in, right? And so, yes, it is more work, but I'm arguing it's valuable work. It's really worth the investment of time. Other questions? Nobody's going to ask about color. Everybody always wants to know about color. What color should I use? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks.